My name is Rowan Hayes. I'm 34 years old, former CIA operative, decorated in silence, buried in shadows. I've lived through bombings, black sites, and botched recon ops in countries that don't officially exist. I've watched comrades bleed out in dust-choked alleys while the rest of the world scrolled their phones. But nothing compared to what happened last Saturday. They erased me, not from a document, not from a database. They erased me from my own bloodline. My twin sister, Leah Hayes, died 3 weeks ago. Massive stroke. They said, no autopsy, buried in white silk like she was some kind of martyr. You might have seen the tribute on CNN. Leah Hayes, a homeland hero. That's what the Chiron read. They honored her with a national memorial in Georgetown. Heads of state, defense contractors, politicians, and all the people who play poker with human lives behind closed doors. There were speeches, orchestras, a tribute montage projected onto a 40-foot LED screen, childhood photos, Harvard commencement, UN appearances. Not one single mention of me. Not a name, not a face, not even a blurred image in a background crowd. I wasn't just ignored, I was erased. The kicker, I showed up. Full dress uniform, medals polished, my credentials in hand. I thought, foolishly, maybe this was the moment they'd finally say my name out loud. But instead, a man in a black suit and earpiece stopped me at the front gate. Sorry, ma'am, you're not on the list. Not on the list. I'm the twin sister of the deceased. I served in shadow ops on 5 continents. I once took a bullet for an asset Leia sent into the field. And I wasn't on the list. He scanned my ID badge, frowned, tapped his radio. You need to step aside. So I stood there, in full uniform, outside my sister's memorial, while everyone else walked past me like I was a protester or a journalist with the wrong badge. And through the glass wall of the conference center, I saw my parents, Sylvia and Harold Hayes, smiling, hugging donors, shaking hands. No grief in their faces. Just optics. And in that moment, I realized they didn't forget me. They cut me. Deliberately. Strategically. Because I had become a liability. This is the story of how I found the truth behind Leia's death. And how I made sure they could never erase me again. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on the most powerful people in my life, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment if you've ever been the black sheep, the forgotten sibling, the scapegoat, the one who wasn't supposed to make it. Because trust me, this story, it's for you. If you're picturing some dysfunctional blue-collar household with slamming doors and therapy bills, think again. The Hayes family isn't broken, it's perfect. Too perfect. We lived in a 3-story colonial in Alexandria, Virginia. White fence, blue shutters, the smell of fresh lawn chemicals and ambition in the air. Every wall in our house had framed degrees, awards, or military commendations. No fingerprints, no childhood drawings, no clutter, just legacy. My father, Harold Hayes, was a national security advisor under 2 administrations. My mother, Sylvia, ran a humanitarian NGO with suspiciously clean books. Our dinner table wasn't for conversation, it was for strategy, policy, appearances. And then there was Leia, my mirror image, only shinier. While I snuck comic books into my textbooks, she memorized NATO treaties. While I practiced field stripping a rifle in ROTC, she was giving a speech at the Model UN. I never hated her. I just knew I couldn't compete. They never said it outright, but the implication was clear. Rowan's the rugged one, Leia's the refined one. When we were 18, we both got our acceptance letters. I chose West Point. She chose Harvard Kennedy School. I thought they'd be proud. I thought finally I was doing something that mattered. But my father only said, West Point's respectable, for people without options. My mother smiled politely, and handed me a list of posture clinics to help me look less rigid in uniform. That was the last family dinner I ever attended as just Rowan, daughter of the Hayes. I joined SAD's Special Activities Division within 2 years. That meant no press, no credit, no records. And weirdly, it suited me. There's a kind of sacred honesty in the silence of operations. You do the job, you bleed, sweat, sacrifice, you come home, and no one claps. But, I lost a toe in Kazakhstan, cracked 3 ribs in Syria, got waterboarded by a rogue agent who thought I was lying about my extraction route. Spoiler, I wasn't. And through all of it, I sent holiday cards home. Blank inside, except for my name. Never got a single one back. Leia, meanwhile, was rising like helium, appointed Assistant Director of Homeland Security at 32. Dubbed the Iron Orchid by Politico. She dated senators, appeared on talk shows, gave interviews with perfect lighting and carefully angled flags in the background. And yet we never spoke. Until the last time, 3 months before she died, Leia asked to meet. She picked a private room in a defense gala in D.C., the kind of place where decisions get made over seared duck and $800 wine. I wore a plain black dress. She wore a custom navy pantsuit with a subtle American flag pin. We didn't hug. She got straight to it. Rowan, there's chatter about a leak tied to an op you oversaw in Belarus. I froze. She shouldn't have known about that. That op wasn't just classified, it was sealed. I asked how she knew. She didn't answer, just sipped her wine. They're looking for someone to take the fall. You've been invisible long enough. I looked her in the eye, the same gray-blue eyes I'd seen in the mirror since childhood. Are you offering me up? She didn't flinch, just placed her napkin gently on the table. You have no press history, no public record, no political future to lose. Translation, you're expendable. Just like that. That was the moment I realized I wasn't her sister anymore. I was just a liability. I left that gala with a taste in my mouth more bitter than the wine. That taste stayed for days' numbness at first. Then a slow-building heat under my skin. For years, I'd accepted my place in the shadows. I told myself it was noble to be invisible, that the mission mattered more than credit, that silence meant strength. But that night, for the first time, silence felt like surrender. Leia wasn't warning me out of concern she was placing a chess piece, and I was the sacrificial pawn. She didn't even blink, didn't hesitate to offer up her own sister to preserve the family legacy, to shield the administration, to keep her headlines clean. And suddenly, I couldn't stop seeing it the way she always looked right through me when cameras were around. The way my mother's lips tightened when I wore fatigues to a holiday dinner. The way my father once joked that if I died in the field, at least it wouldn't affect campaign optics. I had always laughed along. But now those memories sat heavy in my gut. No longer amusing. They were clues, hints, warnings. Then the news came. 3 weeks after the gala, Leia was dead. Acute cerebral hemorrhage, the media said. A spontaneous medical tragedy. No warning signs, no foul play, no further questions. But people like me, we don't trust neat endings. We don't believe in coincidence, especially when the dead woman was about to testify at a closed-door hearing on foreign contractor surveillance failures. Failures tied to a company partially owned by our mother's NGO. A week before that testimony, Leia suddenly began pushing false intelligence, suggesting a rogue leak came from within CIA's SAD division. The same leak she had accused me of knowing about. It smelled wrong. It reeked of someone cleaning up loose ends. But I had no proof. Not yet. At the memorial, I kept my mouth shut, for now. But when I looked at the program they handed guests, it hit me like a slap. There was a page titled Family Tribute. It listed Harold and Sylvia Hayes, parents, Senator James Wallace, fiancé, godchildren Ava and Henry Wallace, survived by her extended family in service and public trust. No mention of her twin.
No mention of me.
That omission was deliberate. I wasn't forgotten. I was disowned, strategically deleted. And when I saw my mother step onto the stage and recite the words, "Leia was the heart of our family, our pride and our future," I knew something else. Leia had been the puppet. I wasn't just erasing a dead woman's mistakes. I was about to pull the curtain back on an entire empire built on image, power, and quiet corruption. But I couldn't do it alone. I started by reaching out to Marcus Vance, my former SAIDI instructor and unofficial mentor. He'd retired years ago after a field op went sideways in Sudan. But if anyone knew how to navigate the web Leia had left behind, it was him. I used an old burner encrypted with his signature protocol, 4 misspelled keywords, and a phrase we used in training crows, "Don't forget." He replied within an hour. We met 2 days later in the basement of a rundown diner in Fredericksburg, Virginia, the kind of place where grease covers everything and secrets go unnoticed. He looked older, grayer, and half a step slower, but his mind was still diamond sharp. When I told him what I suspected, that Leia was involved in a cover-up and possibly marked me for sacrifice, he didn't even flinch. He just nodded, opened a faded leather binder, and slid me a file. "I've been waiting for you to catch up." Inside were call logs, photos, and a list of encrypted bank transfers, tens of thousands, moved through shell companies tied to a defense subcontractor called Oricent Systems. The same company Leia once publicly advocated for during a congressional security briefing. But what caught my eye was one name buried in the routing data: Peterson Trust Holdings. Senator Peterson, my mother's biggest political donor, and James Wallace's longtime advisor. Now it made sense. Leia had been running PR for a defense scam. She found out someone was close to exposing the data breach at Oricent Me and tried to pin the whole thing on SAD's leak history. She thought if I went down quietly, the investigation would die with me. But something changed. Maybe she started getting cold feet. Maybe she was going to flip. Then she died. I asked Marcus the question I'd been avoiding. "You think Leia was murdered?" He didn't answer directly. He just handed me another file. An internal memo, CIA security clearance level, redacted about a restricted compound in Reston, Virginia, a biotech lab. The last place Leia visited before her collapse. The memo ended with one line scheduled for silent dissolution. They'd buried her dirty footprints before the autopsy ink even dried. I stared at the page until the words blurred. My sister had sold me out. Then someone silenced her. My mother had stood on a stage and wept crocodile tears, knowing full well what had happened behind the scenes. And the entire damn system, from the media to the military, just let it go. No, I wasn't going to let it go. I was going to make them remember what happens when you erase the wrong ghost. And that meant doing what I'd trained my whole life to avoid coming into the light. But not before laying the trap. Because the difference between revenge and recklessness is planning. And I was going to plan this like an op, not a vendetta, not a scream for attention, but a methodical extraction of truth. The kind that cuts clean. The kind that leaves scars. But before I burned their house of cards down, I needed to find the one match no one thought I could ever light again. And I knew exactly where to look. Because Leia kept a vault. And I knew the combination. The vault was never mentioned in family conversations. Not even in whispers. But I remembered it because I was the one who helped her choose the reinforced titanium casing back in 2016. Back then, Leia said she needed a place to store sensitive travel docs passports, backup ID chips, foreign currency. It was all very plausible, until I spotted the biometric lock. You don't use iris scan tech for vacation money. You use it for leverage, for secrets. The vault was hidden behind a bookcase in her private residence in McLean, Virginia, a modern fortress wrapped in marble and hypocrisy. After her death, control of the estate shifted to Senator Wallace. Convenient. Right, I didn't have a legal reason to be there. No court-granted access. No executor privileges. But legality had never stopped me before. Marcus and I staged the entry on a stormy Tuesday. 11:42 p.m., power grid at low draw, minimal traffic, and heavy rain to blur the cameras. I bypassed the external alarms with a dummy access signal I'd coded from an old credential Leia once used in Brussels. The moment I stepped inside, a familiar chill wrapped around my spine, not from fear, but memory. I'd been in this house before, back when things were normal, back when I thought being her twin meant something sacred. The house smelled the same eucalyptus, leather, a faint trace of her expensive fig-scented candles. For a second, I could almost see her Leia at the breakfast bar in silk pajamas, reading policy briefs like poetry. And then the image shattered. The bookcase hadn't been moved, which meant the vault was still there. I activated the sequence pressure touch to the lower left corner, a slight tilt on the top shelf, and the click echoed like a whisper from the grave. Behind the wall, matte titanium, fingerprint smudges still visible, iris scanner glowing faint green. The backup code hadn't changed. She always used a date no one else would guess, 11/09/03, the night I saved her life in Lebanon. Funny how she used a memory she never acknowledged as the key to her most protected secret. Inside the vault, everything was neatly stacked. Digital drives, a few hard copy documents, 2 burner phones, and a velvet pouch. The pouch held something strange, an SD card in a case engraved with the Peterson Trust Holdings logo. It felt warm in my hand, like it had been waiting. The drives were encrypted, of course, and I couldn't risk decrypting them on site. We packed everything and left in under 5 minutes. Back at Marcus's safe house, we got to work. The drives were locked with triple-layered ICE encryption Leia's signature, but buried in her coding, I found a file labeled Hosta Mem, a ghost protocol, host authentication memory. Basically, a digital failsafe she must have created if something happened to her. And when I ran it, the screen blinked alive with a folder titled Silk Framework. Inside video footage, surveillance, audio logs, transaction trails. Leia hadn't just been involved, she'd documented everything. The Oricent breach, the fake contractor evaluations, the hush money wired through Peterson's foundations. And then came the footage that changed everything. Leia, sitting in a conference room, no makeup, no PR gloss, just her and Senator Peterson. "I don't like being forced," she said, voice low. "You weren't forced," he replied smoothly. "You benefited. We all did." "My sister didn't." "Your sister is a loose end. If you don't deal with it, someone else will." The date stamped 2 days before her death. That footage broke something in me. She had tried to protect me. Too late, too quietly, but she tried, which meant someone else pulled the final string. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat thudding in my throat. All these years I had painted Leia in only one color ambition, but maybe, buried beneath the facade, there was a sliver of guilt, of loyalty, a part of her that still remembered who we were before the politics, the power, the betrayal. But remorse doesn't resurrect, and redemption doesn't come cheap. I couldn't just leak the footage. If I went public too early, they'd spin it, they'd smear me, paint me as disgruntled, unstable, maybe even pin Leia's death on me. I needed a stage they couldn't control, one so public, so official, that they wouldn't be able to erase me again. The Homeland Security Summit was 1 week away. Leia was supposed to keynote before her death. They hadn't announced a replacement yet. That was my window. But how does a disavowed agent, a non-entity on paper, get the podium at the most televised security event in the country? By becoming useful. I reached out to Director David Carter, current head of the CIA. The man owed me nothing, but he knew my file. He knew what I'd done for the agency, the lives I'd saved, the missions I'd buried in the silence. I sent him a private dossier, just enough of the Silk framework to prove I wasn't bluffing, not enough to be dismissed as blackmail. He called within 6 hours. "What do you want, Rowan?"
A microphone.
There was silence on the line. Then you go rogue. You're on your own. I always was. He arranged a 10-minute slot. Commemorative remarks. They called it a symbolic gesture for diverse voices in service. They didn't know I was about to drag a live wire across their entire power grid. The night before the summit, Marcus and I reviewed the plan. Not just what I would say, but how I'd say it. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about exposure, about lighting a match in a room soaked in image and gasoline. But as I rehearsed, my voice caught. "You okay?" Marcus asked. I shook my head. No, but that's not the point. Because this wasn't closure. This was detonation. And if I did it right, by the end of tomorrow, the whole damn house would burn. The morning of the summit. I woke before dawn, heart steady, but everything else in me coiled tight like a wire stretched too far. I'd been through ambushes, botched extractions, 18-hour interrogations, but nothing felt as exposing as stepping into that ballroom. Not in shadow, not in armor, but in full view of every person who had spent years pretending I didn't exist. The conference hall in Crystal City was dressed to impress banners etched with slogans like "United through Security," flags draped in perfect symmetry, glass pitchers filled with lemon slices no one would drink, and rows of carefully curated elites in designer suits and ambition-starched uniforms. I watched from backstage as speaker after speaker delivered polished lies disguised as policy. Senator Wallace spoke on continuity through loss, mentioning Leia with just the right balance of emotion and statesmanship. My mother sat in the second row, wearing the navy blazer she always wore to funerals she didn't mourn. Her expression was unreadable, like she'd trained her face to feel nothing. Maybe she had. When my name was announced, there was a subtle murmur in the audience. Confusion, recognition, discomfort. I stepped up, uniform sharp, ribbons aligned, medals gleaming not as decoration, but as proof. Every step echoed in my chest. And then I stood at the podium, a single spotlight narrowing my world into a tunnel. "Good afternoon. My name is Rowan Hayes." A pause. I heard chairs shift. Someone cleared their throat. Good. Let them squirm. I served 17 years in covert operations under Special Activities Division. I operated without public record, without interviews or handshakes, and with the full weight of this nation's decisions behind every silent step I took. Another pause, eyes narrowing, whispers beginning. I leaned in. "And I am the sister of the late Leia Hayes." That got them, even from the podium. I could see the ripple through the room like a tremor under polished marble. Some of them had probably assumed I was a cousin. Or a coincidence. Not her. Not the invisible sibling no one talked about. I wasn't on the memorial program. I wasn't acknowledged at the funeral. I wasn't listed as family. And now, I want to explain why. I tapped the control embedded in my sleeve. The screen behind me flickered to life. Not with graphics, not with flags, but with footage. The first clip was subtle Leia in her office, looking tired, rubbing her temples as she reviewed classified reports. The timestamp in the corner blinked quietly. Over the last 3 months of her life, Leia Hayes was under increasing pressure to protect something she knew was indefensible: a network of fraudulent defense contracts, falsified security reviews, and concealed data breaches that put millions of American citizens at risk. Some of you in this room knew. Some of you signed the same documents. Murmurs turned to gasps. I let them rise, then triggered the next clip. The conversation with Senator Peterson.
It played in full, unedited. Leia's face, stripped of political polish, glaring across a mahogany table.
My sister didn't. Your sister is a loose end. If you don't deal with it, someone else will. Silence swept across the room like a black wave. I could see Senator Peterson stiffen in his seat. I could see my mother's jaw clench so hard, her earrings trembled. I kept my voice level, calm, razor sharp. They erased me because I was inconvenient, because I wouldn't shut up, because I didn't match the image, because when they asked me to fall on the sword for something I didn't do, I said no. And that made me a threat, not to national security, to their security of legacy, of power, of narrative. The final clip rolled wire transfers, signatures, timestamps, Leia's voice narrating a private journal entry she'd left encoded in the SD card. If this goes out, they'll destroy me. But maybe Rowan was right. Maybe there's no legacy worth protecting if it's built on silence. The screen faded to black. I looked out at the room. Dozens of faces now turned pale, eyes down, mouths tight. This is not about vengeance, I said. This is about truth. This is about what happens when you forget that people behind the policies are still people. This is about how easy it is to erase someone when you decide they're inconvenient, and what happens when they refuse to stay gone. I stepped back. No applause, just the weighted silence of something breaking.
Then it began.
First, a few reporters whispering furiously into phones, then security radioing someone, probably to check if the footage was real. And finally, Director Carter stood, not to stop me, but to nod, just once. They couldn't deny it now. By evening, the Silk framework was trending on every major news outlet. Peterson's office issued a no comment. My mother's NGO website went dark. James Wallace withdrew from his re-election campaign. But none of that compared to what I found the next morning. A letter, slipped under the door of my apartment. No stamp, no return address, just my name. Inside a single page, handwritten. I tried to protect you. I failed. If you're reading this, it means you were braver than me. I hope that means something, L. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. But what came next, I never saw coming. The letter shook me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had gone into this war believing Leia was the final mask behind the betrayal, the one who threw me to the wolves. I never expected her to leave behind something human, something raw. Her words cut deeper than any insult, deeper even than being erased. They implied she had known. She had watched me burn while she stayed quiet. And when it was too late, when she was gone, only then did she whisper. I tried. But what did that even mean? Was it a confession? A plea? A breadcrumb? I would never know. Dead people don't clarify themselves. The fallout from the summit came fast and sharp. Within 72 hours, Senator Peterson resigned under medical leave. A quiet federal inquiry followed. Not loud enough for prison sentences, but loud enough to end careers. The Silk framework became the centerpiece of a new congressional oversight push into private defense contracting. A lot of speeches, a lot of PR. Some even called Leia a reluctant whistleblower, which made me nauseous. But I stayed silent, because this wasn't about rewriting her story. It was about reclaiming mine.
Director Carter called me in for a closed-door debrief. His tone was cold, professional, not hostile but not welcoming either.
You burned a lot of bridges, Rowan. They were already on fire, I answered.
He looked tired. He offered me a low-profile role in overseas intelligence non-leadership, non-visible. I declined. I wasn't going back into the shadows. Not now. Not ever again.
Instead, I launched something I never thought I'd touch: a public initiative. The ECHO Directive, a foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers within national security, with a special arm supporting ex-operatives forced out due to politics, optics, or family name. I used Laya's footage, her notes, her documents, the very things she tried to bury or reveal in pieces. I used them all, not to destroy her, but to make sure no one ever had to choose between truth and belonging the way she did, or the way I had to. For a time, I became a reluctant symbol, the forgotten twin who spoke truth. I hated the headlines, the way they softened everything into digestible drama. There was nothing digestible about being erased by your own blood and having to claw your way back, not for revenge, but for simple recognition that you existed. My mother never reached out. No letter, no call. I didn't expect one. Last I heard, she retired to Europe, citing emotional exhaustion. Funny, exhaustion isn't what happens when you lie for a lifetime. It's what happens when the lie stops working. James Wallace. He went silent. 2. His press team claimed he was refocusing on personal growth. Translation: he got out before the fire reached his desk. But not everyone vanished. Marcus stayed close, like a lighthouse, not warm, but constant. He reminded me, when the accolades started, when the press got hungry for more, don't let them make you a hero. They'll love you for a day, then eat you the next. And he was right. Public love is just curated attention. It's not redemption. It's not family. It's not forgiveness. One night, months after the summit, I found myself rewatching Laya's final journal entry.
If this goes out, they'll destroy me. But maybe Rowan was right.
That maybe haunted me, because it meant she never fully believed in either side. Not theirs, not mine. She lived her life performing loyalty to our parents, to the state, even to the image she'd built of herself. I wondered if she ever knew who she truly was underneath all of it. I wondered that about myself too. Who was I, if not the erased twin? Who was I without someone to push back against? In that moment, I realized the revenge was over. The war had been fought, names had been exposed, narratives cracked. But what comes after revenge isn't peace. It's silence again, a different kind. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of no longer having to scream.
I still go to Arlington sometimes, not to visit anyone. I don't believe in standing over stone, but I walk past the rows, reading names, dates, imagining lives. Some of them probably knew my name once, out there in the dust and ash of unnamed wars. Some maybe owed me their lives. Others, I might have failed.
But I walk because I can, because I'm not invisible anymore, because I wrote myself back into the story. And sometimes, just sometimes, I imagine a different version of us. Me and Leia. No podiums, no medals, no erasure, just 2 girls on a front porch, sipping bad coffee, laughing at how messed up the world is, still arguing over who was Mom's favorite.
That version never happened.
But at least now, no one can pretend I never existed. People think revenge is loud, explosive, a gunshot, a scream, a courtroom gasp. But real revenge, the kind that satisfies, is quiet. It's the moment you look in the mirror and no longer see someone begging to be acknowledged. It's when you know they can never bury you again, because you learned how to dig yourself out with your bare hands, with your truth. They say blood is thicker than water, but image is thinner than paper. And when it burns, oh, how brightly it burns. If you've ever been the forgotten one, the quiet sibling, the scapegoat, the shadow in a family of light, leave a comment. Tell me your story, or just say, I see you. Because maybe we were never invisible. Maybe we were just waiting for someone to finally look. Subscribe for more stories like this, raw, real, and finally heard. And remember, being underestimated is not a weakness. It's your sharpest edge. If you know when to cut,